This is Full in Bloom's Inside the Album. The making of Ozzy Osbourne's Bark at the Moon album was a tumultuous journey marked by creative challenges and personnel changes. In 1982, following the tragic death of Randy Rhoads, Ozzy found himself in need of a new guitarist to continue his solo career. Ozzy confidant Dana Strum conducted the first round of auditions, narrowing down a field of about 25 guitarists to 3 finalists, Jake E. Lee, Mitch Perry, and George Lynch, who had previously auditioned for Ozzy 3 years earlier when Randy Rhoads was chosen. Lynch's second attempt seemed promising at first. He was flown to various locations, including Scotland, Ireland, and England, to tour with the band. While Lynch never actually performed on stage during this period, he did participate in sound checks and spent time with the band as they assessed his chemistry with the group. During a Full in Bloom interview with George Lynch, the guitarist talked about how he prepared for the audition.
I was having some difficulties in learning all the material. I've never been in a cover band. I'm not really good at picking up other people's stuff. So Warren DeMartini offered to help me, and he'd come over to my apartment for multiple days and just sit with me and help me pick it apart. Very helpful, and got me to the point where I could play the songs pretty confidently.
Wow, I didn't know that. So you actually worked with Warren on learning the Randy Rhoads stuff?
Yes, as a friend, helped me out. Great to watch how he did it, sitting there and picking it apart and figuring it out. Well, I couldn't do that. I have no idea what this guy's doing, and he would sort of find out how to do it, and then he would show me.
Despite his efforts, Lynch faced unexpected obstacles. Ozzy reportedly had an issue with Lynch's short hair, while Sharon Osbourne took issue with the color of his guitar. On his time with Ozzy, George Lynch said, "Initially, the one negative I heard from their camp was that Sharon thought my guitar looked like a booger. I had this green and black Tiger, actually the first Tiger I'd made before I made my yellow and black one. Also, Ozzy came into my hotel room at one point and said, 'Why did you cut your hair?' He was really bummed that I had short hair. I was actually doing a day gig as a liquor delivery driver and I couldn't have long hair. I could have bought a wig, but Ozzy was bald at the time, so his argument didn't carry a lot of weight with me."
Why did you shave your head, Ozzy?
I was kind of bored, I thought, well, what can I do today, I was bored of saying to the traffic warden, "Hey, don't book me, shave me." No, I just thought, seriously, I thought, shave your head. And you know what?
No. What?
I guess you didn't know. Last night at the gig, there's a lot of kids in the audience with shaved heads. Look what I'm doing to the United States of America, man. I'm a public threat.
George Lynch continued, "I would travel with the band to kind of see how everything worked and so they could get to know me, but I never went on stage during the show. I would be in the wings at soundcheck, and Brad Gillis, who was the guitar player at the time, would come over and hand me his guitar, and I would play a song or two. And then we went into rehearsals. We rehearsed in Texas for a while. I'd been playing with Don Costa, and for some reason, I don't remember why, but I recommended Don Costa, and he got the Ozzy gig. He looked great. He had a cheese grater on the back of his bass, and he would scrape his knuckles on it. It would bleed everywhere, and Ozzy loved that. The touring was in Scotland, England, and Ireland, and then we moved everything over to Los Angeles."
I don't know if I had personality cohesion with Ozzy and the band to be a long-term guy, because I feel I can get along with anybody and try to be pretty easygoing, and I'm pretty stubborn as far as my musical aspirations and thoughts and directions. So I would be probably running into problems with that. I'm not the kind of guy that just, takes orders and goes in, studio musician or plays in somebody else's band and does what I'm told. I just never, always just made my own music and followed that vision.
During a Full in Bloom interview with Great White's Mark Kendall, the guitarist said,
"Costa, I actually got him a gig in Ozzy through George Lynch. George Lynch called me one day and said he was in Dallas and he was auditioning for Ozzy and they need a bass player. He goes, 'That bass player you guys had would be perfect.' And I called Costa. He went there. He'd already quit our band like about 3 weeks prior. The way I understood it, I thought George had that gig locked down. But what happened was, when they saw Costa and his long, hideous black hair and his image and everything, he pretty much got the gig instantly. Well, Jake was auditioning too. When they saw those two guys together, they said, that's the band. Because Lynch had cut his hair pretty short.
Jakey Lee's path to becoming Ozzy's guitarist was marked by a series of unexpected detours and pivotal moments. Lee started his musical journey at the age of 6 with classical piano lessons. However, it wasn't until he was introduced to Jimi Hendrix's music at age 12 that he became captivated by the guitar. Inspired by Hendrix's iconic sound, Lee transitioned from piano to guitar. By the time he was 18, he was already leading a local covers band called Teaser, showcasing his burgeoning talent as a guitarist. I was considered pretty much the best guitar player in San Diego, Lee said. I knew it, and I sure had a lot of people tell me that. In his early 20s, Lee bid farewell to his hometown and headed to Los Angeles. There, he quickly connected with Stephen Pearcy, a fellow San Diego transplant who was reassembling his previous group, Mickey Rat. The band would soon evolve and become the iconic hard rock glam group Rat. Lee's tenure with Rat was brief, largely due to creative differences with Pearcy, who envisioned Rat as a fashion rock band and wanted Lee to adopt a style that fit this image. I told him that was the lamest sounding motto I'd ever heard. So I quit Rat. I had nothing going on, and I was going to Motley Crue gigs. Nicky and Tommy wanted me in the band. They actually wanted me to replace Mick, which you can understand that. Better looking and better playing. Mick's in-law or whatever was funding the band, so that didn't happen. But there was talk of Motley Crue maybe having 2 guitar players, which even then, I was like, Motley Crue, 2 guitar players? I don't know about that. Eventually, Lee opted to join Los Angeles band Rough Cut instead, primarily to establish a connection with the band's manager, Wendy Dio, and her husband, Ronnie James Dio, who had recently parted ways with Black Sabbath. It was a smart play that worked, if only briefly. The strategic move soon led to an opportunity with Ronnie James Dio's new band Dio in the summer of 1982. However, this collaboration was short-lived. After just a month of rehearsals, Lee was fired and replaced by a 19-year-old Irish guitarist named Vivian Campbell. In retrospect, Lee says, I think Ronnie wanted a more straightforward British-sounding guitar player. I'm not that. Nowadays, the guitarist reflects on his dismissal from Dio with a philosophical outlook, but at the time he was deeply distraught. In an attempt to cope with the emotional pain, he turned to excessive drinking, spending 3 consecutive months getting wasted every night. I'd wake up and not know where I was and what I'd done the night before, he recalled. Ironically, it was the prospect of joining forces with the most famous alcoholic in rock and roll that ultimately helped him escape his own booze-fueled turmoil. Regarding his Ozzy audition, Lee said, Someone contacted me about it. At first I said no, because I didn't want to step into Randy Rhoads' shoes. It's hard enough trying to replace a good guitar player, and I don't want this to sound callous, but when they die, they turn into legends. I didn't want to be compared to somebody else for the rest of my life. But I went down there anyway, and I think there was a list of 25 guitar players. We each spent 15 minutes in the studio doing whatever we wanted to do. We had our pictures taken, they were given to Ozzy, and he picked 3 of us, George, Mitch, Perry, and me. George was given first crack at it, and he went out on tour with Ozzy. He didn't play any shows, but he would do sound checks and stuff like that. Apparently, Ozzy wasn't really happy with the way George sounded during the sound checks, so he wanted to hear somebody else. So I got a call one night that Ozzy was going to be in town, and he wanted to hear me play, and it would be with the band. The very next day, I was supposed to show up at the studio. I didn't know the songs because I didn't think I was going to get a call back, so I had to go out and borrow the record from somebody, the first Ozzy album, and I learned Crazy Train and I Don't Know, and I showed up for the audition. I didn't know the songs, but they're actually pretty similar. They're both in A, they're both about the same tempo, and they have the 16th note lower A string predominating through it. When I did the audition, I would kind of mix the parts up, and I'd go into different parts. So I thought the audition was terrible because I was messing up the songs. It's not like I couldn't play, but I obviously didn't know the songs. Mitch Perry, a talented axeman who had previously played with bands like Steeler and Talus, said, Jakey Lee and I were the last 2 guitar players to audition for Ozzy. He'd hired George Lynch for about 2 minutes and said, "This isn't going to work." Ozzy asked Dana Strum for 10 tapes of the 10 best guys in L.A., and he picked me and Jake to come down and play. Kerrang! Magazine reported on the audition. They said, "The gig came out to a shootout between Jake and a baby-faced Pat Thrallish guitarist named Mitch. It basically said it came down to him and me." Jakey Lee's path to joining Ozzy's band was not without its own drama. In a twist of fate, Lee almost lost his chance when he arrived 45 minutes late to his final audition. Ozzy was on the verge of walking out saying, "Fuck it, if this guy doesn't care enough to show up on time and he's going to be this kind of problem, forget it. I don't care how good he is." Ultimately, Dana Strum intervened and successfully persuaded the legendary frontman to stay. I was a bit worried that Jake would not have the songs or riffs to bring to the audition, Strum said, so we spent a few nights working things out. We put down what would later become 3 of the riffs for songs on the Bark at the Moon album. It was a trip, but more than that, a way to secure Jake a gig and write some Ozzy stuff from afar. He was late to the audition and with a girl in tow, but nonetheless, he was damn good. He played a number of styles that shocked me. Jake honestly was a more talented guitar player than a lot of people thought he was. My favorite thing that Jake did on the audition tapes that I did with him was this classical thing that almost brought tears to my eyes. I'm like, "Dude, you're really gifted. You don't belong in Hollywood. You're a really gifted musician." And he looked at me like he saw a ghost. I said, "Are you kidding me? You're beautiful at what you do. Don't you know that? You've been in Hollywood so long, you don't even know that anymore." Jakey Lee's audition impressed Ozzy, and he was ultimately chosen to fill the enormous void left by Randy Rhoads. At the end, Lee recalled, as I was packing my gear up, George walked in. It was the first time I ever met him. He walked in and he said, "How'd it go?" And I said, "I don't know. I don't think I got it." And then Ozzy walked up and he looked at me and said, "Do you want it?" I said, "Do I want it?" And he says, "Yeah, do you want the fucking gig?" I said, "Yes." And he turned to George and said, "It's his. You lost it." And then he walked away. That was the first time I saw Ozzy fire somebody. Never a pretty sight. It was after Ozzy walked away, I turned to George and said, "Hi, my name's Jake, by the way." It was a very awkward introduction. On being fired, George Lynch said, "I was devastated. My wife was with me. I'd quit my job. We had 2 little kids and we lived in an apartment. We didn't really have much money, so it was a great opportunity. I was a delivery driver for a liquor company, and I would deliver booze into the not-so-good areas. Nobody else wanted to drive into those areas, so I took that job. It was a good union job, and I made enough money to support us, but I had to quit that job to go do the Ozzy thing. And when they fired me like that, and they didn't pay me, they didn't give me any compensation, they didn't ask me if I was okay or anything, they just didn't care. I couldn't believe it. My heart just dropped, and yeah, I think I cried on the way home. It was very devastating, and it was done very cold. It was a month out of my life. And I would think anybody in that position would at least say, "Hey, are you going to be okay? Do you need a little something just to get back on your feet?" Nothing. Not even a fucking nickel. It was just insane. So we got evicted from our apartment, and I couldn't find a job. And we were behind on bills while I was doing this whole audition thing and tramping around the world with these guys wasting everybody's time. I came back with nothing, and we got evicted. We had to move in with her folks into their garage. It was just rough, and it took me another year to get out of that mess. One of the reasons I think I didn't get it was the image. Jake had a great image. He showed up the night I got fired, with full leather, like a Michael Jackson leather jumpsuit with hair down to his ass. I think Sharon was really the one calling the shots, and she wanted somebody that looked right. She felt that Jake was the look they were going for. I don't think she cared too much about the playing. I had the songs down, and I felt confident that I could play everything like I needed to, especially once I got comfortable. I think really the linchpin, no pun intended, in me not getting the gig was Tommy Aldridge's opinion of me. He thought I was this kind of animal that really needed to be in my own band, that I'm not one of these guys that fits into anyone else's project very easily. He's right about that. I've never played in a cover band or under anybody else's rules.
It's like the Ozzy Osbourne School of Rock and Roll.
It really has been. You have been the Ted Mack Amateur Hour of Rock and Roll, where people have unknowns.
I always wonder, people say, why do you always go for the unknowns? I think I got this funny theory that if you want to be better than somebody, it's great. But then beat, and I always like to get somebody that's so unknown that rather than go and get a name guitar player.
Don't you think it's because they're hungry?
Yeah, they're hungry. It's like when I was a kid, you know, there was a soccer player that we all wanted to be as good as. It's so good for a young kid to come up and be better than that person.
In the end, though, when you reflect on your life, it turned out right for you, correct? In your mind, or that Dokken was the better route? Or do you think it would have been cooler if you would have gotten the Ozzy gig instead of being in Dokken?
Well, that's a many worlds, all possible worlds butterfly concept question. There's no way of knowing the answer to that, because there's a million different possible outcomes.
Just your gut feel. I mean, obviously you made way more money, I would think, in Dokken than when you look at what Jake made and how basically he got screwed over on Bark at the Moon, where he got nothing except for like 20,000.
It elevates you to another level where then everything that comes after that. Very hard to say how that would have panned out. Knowing myself, I'm pretty aggressive about going after stuff and developing things and creating opportunities for myself and then following up on them. But unfortunately, not always making the right decisions. I would say that I would have probably parlayed that into something better for myself, because it would have elevated my notoriety and status as a guitar player. But that's unknowable, and I think it probably would have been a wash, actually, when you think about it, because all roads would have led to the same mountain.